Good morning. Nobody could be more surprised than I am to be with you this morning. Two intertwining paths have drawn me into your midst, each of which began about 45 years ago. My East Asian history professor introduced me first to Taoism in our ancient Chinese history classes, and then in our office hours together, he introduced me to Tolkien. These two long arcs join today. A couple of months ago, Fortress Press published my Tao Te Ching, Power for the Peaceful, a translation and commentary. And now every Friday, I join two 12-year-olds for discussion, reenactments, and dramatic readings from our read-through of Lord of the Rings. But it's my connection with Corey Olson's podcast, Exploring the Lord of the Rings, that led me to submit this proposal. So Tao and Tolkien are in heavy rotation for me. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I have. So I'm going to invite you to a most human conversation, even though I would consider human and other than human Middle-earth residents. When elves, humans, and hobbits confront the One Ring, they each experience false promises of power, prestige, or plans for the future. But Bombadil's introduction to the ring was altogether different. And I'll explain this stark variance through Tao Te Ching, the 2,500-year-old spiritual text from China, and the second most translated text of its kind in the world after the New Testament. I'm not offering yet another origin or identity theory about Tom. These are legion. For more on Bombadil theories, you can't do any better than to start with episode 121 of the fantastic Prancing Pony podcast. But I'm going to attempt one question. Why is Bombadil the only one in Middle-earth to experience no complicating interactions with the One Ring? Maybe the ring did not want Tom? Everyone else, from Gandalf to Galadriel, to Bilbo and Frodo, elves and dwarves, and especially Gollum, developed complicating desires, leading to dishonest visions of themselves were they to wield the One Ring. Each has a wish list. Each struggles with maintaining and managing her own desires because the ring has become the kryptonite with which they could not part. They are never resting and ever wrestling with the ring, as I feel intentional on Tolkien's part. I can imagine him thinking, let's place a tempting, even addictive talisman in the middle of history and just watch the variety of responses emerge. Gandalf's, Bilbo's, and especially Galadriel's wrestling with the ring are instructive to us. In Galadriel's case, she says to Bilbo after he offers her the ring, I passed the test. This portrays instructive wrestling, but it is nonetheless a wrestling which Tom himself did not experience. Tom is altogether different. For the rest of us, one must either lose a ring or lose one's self. So what makes Tom so different? Tolkien himself says it was useless to philosophize about Tom Bombadil, but I'd like to think that Tolkien included him as an intentionally uninterpreted example of how we, through Tom, approach our own seductions, something like the One Ring. Author Tom Shippey says that Tom is a one-member category, a major quality of which is naturalness. He goes on to say there's an artless spontaneity with him. He is therefore, quote, fearless, antedating the corruptions of art, artifice, or unnatural talismans. Tom is surely on a unique wavelength, marching to a unique drummer. He does not seem to want to possess or control in the ways that we do. When Tom himself put the rings on, he does not succumb to his power. And why? As I'll argue, it's not part of his nature. He had not cultivated a target for the ring to hit. Tom gives a kind of job description late in the chapter, The Fog on the Bear Downs. I've got things to do, he says. My making and my singing and my talking and my walking and my watching my country. Tom can't always be near to open doors and willow cracks. Tom has his house to mind, and Goldberry is waiting. Without schemes or plans, he seems rather childlike. However, the key takeaway is that Tom is uncolonized by the usual aspirations to power that affected other Middle-earthers. His purpose is other, to live in and tend a country that is a sanctuary for ancient things, things that Tolkien himself loved, like trees, rivers, fields, simple food. Tom is a kind being who enjoys singing, living, talking, and treating all with an uncomplicated grace. His length of days, his childlike simplicity, and attention only to what he felt important in the current moment make him a sui generis person in Middle-earth. And my thesis is what makes him unique? he has the attributes of a Taoist sage. This came home to me in episode 175 of Corey Olson's Exploring the Lord of the Rings podcast, when Corey says, or asks, what is it that he has that makes him impervious to the ring? There's nothing in Tom for the ring to hold on to. It is his contentment, Corey says. He wants for nothing. With what would the ring possibly tempt him with? There's nothing in the ring to hook Tom. To my knowledge, no one has ever paired up Tom with Taoism. Certainly not Tolkien. Tom's uncomplicated relationship with the ring, his mastery of self, and clearness of will remind me of a Taoist master or sage. What's Tao? And what's a Taoist sage? In Chinese history's warring states period, many philosophies arose on how to manage and lead in those tough times. This was the early days of two long-lasting philosophies, Confucianism and Taoism. One could say that Taoism is a metaphysical theory of everything before the theories of everything became popular, showing that everything both interconnects and is also one. Tao is the original nature of the universe and is every particle. Taoism is a spiritual path for remaining in or re-merging into the original nature of the world, and Taoist sages embody an exemplary, ethical Taoist sensibility. The word sage literally translates as one who is holy, or someone of high character. Cooperation with nature distinguishes the Taoist sage. In my translation, the sage makes of himself or herself no target. One who flows with Tao does not make of themselves a vulnerable target by harboring and then developing unnatural desires, like a ring, that first colonize and then expose one as wounded by that colonization. With no ego desire or self-defensiveness about the sage, there are no preferences, no unmanaged desires, and thus there's no place to wound him, for he nurtures no target for a wounding or death blow caused by unmanaged desire. There's no place in Tom for the ring to hook or to hit. On the other hand, someone with a wish list will be ever vulnerable to the ever-growing power their desires wield. This is why Gollum becomes a hooked fish by the ring, and displays how ring fever develops in Bilbo, Frodo, and Boromir. My precious, indeed. The Taoist sage is a rare sort, a misfit in the best possible ways. She lives differently, living as a citizen of and in the natural, original world in which the artificial and the manufactured bling and things of the culture manifest no attraction. The sage masters herself by remaining synced with her original nature, not allowing or cultivating artificial desires. The sage is described as one with no preferences that are desire-driven. When we develop preferences, we open ourselves up to those colonizing and unnatural desires, forgetting our original nature. So the Taoist master is master of her or his own will, and thus never is subject to an ecosystem of things, both real or metaphysical, that can bring one down, like fear, jealousy, pride, the will to dominate, own, and other such lusts. When people cultivate and hold on to or cling to states of preferences, they create divisive things like holy lands, meaning some lands are not holy, special and chosen people, which creates kind of unchosen people, binary only choices of good and evil, which lead to wars and borders, defense budgets. Preferences are the pre-state to all such things. Tom never even gets to this state by being desireless, never attracted in his nature to blings and rings. So in the Council of Elrond, when Arestor says of Tom, it seems that he has a power even over the ring. Gandalf says, no, I would not put it so. Say rather that the ring has no power over him. He is his own master. Tolkien wrote in letter 153, he is master in a peculiar way. He has no fear, no desire of possession or dominion at all. He merely knows and understands about such things as concern him in his natural little realm. He represents the spirit that desires knowledge of other things, their history and nature, entirely unconcerned with doing anything with the knowledge. There are 81 short verses in Tao Te Ching, about 5,000 Chinese characters in all. I'll present in just a quick succession a few photos from my book to demonstrate how I see Tom as a Tao Master. I do this because most of us are probably much more knowledgeable about Tom than Tao. But since you are an intelligent fellowship, I'm going to ask you to make your own connections between the text and Tom in the upcoming verses, rather than me explain everything. That is, just for this slide, and maybe the next one, I'll have a few commentary sentences, but I shall diminish my commentary voiceover as we go through the rest of them and just read the Taoist text. For this slide, Tom has developed no inner susceptibility to this deadly ring in his life. Knowing the beginning and the end of all things, Tom lives within these boundaries in complete innocence, without even a hint for a need of a post-creation ring. The ring, being unnatural, has no place within him, and that's why the ring has no power over Tom. The ring captures those who develop preferences, making each uniquely susceptible to their preferences in way correlating to their preferences. The ring's power enters through preferences, which wounds or targets the ring bearer in order to begin their wraithification. Bombadil is unseducible to this kryptonite. He developed no price in this preference economy. The thing about targets and preferences is that we tend to claim ownership of them. The ring is mine shows the end of a process of clinging and preference. Tom did not succumb to a false sense of self that transmogrified Gollum into a target-enhanced helplessness and made Frodo, spoiler alert, finally fail in his quest to cast the ring into Mount Doom. There are many touchstones between a Taoist master and Tom Bombadil, and here is a few. Verse 22.2. Therefore the sage clings only to the one, even as he models it for everyone. Not focused on self, all know him. Not focused on being right, all see him as a model. Not needing to show off, his success is ensured. Not a glory seeker, his glory lasts and lasts. Not a disputer, the sage has cultivated no one under heaven to dispute against him. So his lack of preference and striving, competing, leaves him desireless, again leaving him with no target. He leaves behind no breadcrumbs that someone else can, that some ring can find and trail him. Verse 33. The two words that begin the first two lines, understanding, is constructed from the radical in Chinese for straight and the character for mouth. So think of Tom as a straight talker. Understanding others is intelligent. Understanding oneself is enlightened. Conquering others shows off one's force, but conquering oneself shows one's authority. The one content with sufficiency is truly wealthy, and the one who acts resolutely is already successful. Centered in one's original belonging place, hello Tom, one endures. Even in dying, one does not perish. And so Tom is going to be this simple person speaking simple, direct, imperative sentences like when he says to Willow, eat earth, dig deep, drink water. Simple, direct. We talked about preferences. Here is the classical text source. Heaven and earth cultivate no preference for outcomes. They regard creations as straw dogs. The sage likewise cultivates no preference. She regards all people without favoritism as if they were straw dogs. Not that the sage is going to think of them as less, but thinks of them without any preference. One is better, one is worse, one is more enjoyable to be with. But none of that gets into the sage's thinking. Verse 2.3. The sage practices non-interference, Wu Wei, which is one of Taoism's main doctrines. Practices non-interference with a natural inner daily life. She silences the urge to define. Situations arouse attention, but she declines to confront, allowing natural processes to proceed without interrupting or possessing. She understands how things naturally and mutually arise without the need to control. She knows the secret to how things last. 27.2. The sages excel in saving others. They abandon no one. I'm thinking about the Barrow-wights with Frodo and his company. Skilled in goodness, they care for all things by just following their inner light. 64. The sage's one desire is never to aspire wrongly or chase needless luxury. She practices learned simplicity. She restores the people's mistakes and assists all beings to return to their natural selves. Again, Barrow-White time. All this without presumptuous meddling. Two more screens, one from and both quotes from Su Che. The sage's words are faint and his deeds are plain, but they're always natural. Hence, he can last and not be exhausted. And though himself unable to forget the world, the sage is able to let the world forget him. And I think that is the final end of Middle-earth regarding Tom Bombadil, that he is going to be one of these sometimes remembered but mostly forgotten kind of people. So, many touchstones between a Tao Master and Bombadil. Of course, the ring is about power, and we are all at times a Samwise or a Boromir projecting their feverish if I had a ring dream. Whether it be to fight our Saurons, or preserve our realms, or sneak around with impunity, from ring fever dreams of being a Robin Hood to correct injustice, to visions of being the warrior or leader that achieves immortal fame. The ring is a dealer in illicit fantasies, tailored to each bearer. The ring reads the innermost desires of its bearer or viewer and feeds them custom-made lies corresponding to the strength and will of the person. For Galadriel, Gandalf, and perhaps even Samwise, I suspect the ring was considered to be a bulwark against change, decay, against aging, against change coming to one's realm and Middle-earth, whether it be Lothlorien or the Shire. For Boromir, his lust for the ring was to preserve the glory of Gondor. To Gollum, the ring lied that he could get away with murder. The ring bears only falsehoods and weaves fictions in which the ring bearer is the savior, or at least blameless. It whispers, "You are an exception to the rules. Use me and gain your heart's desire. You shall not die or change." But these false promises and premises come with a price. Clinging to a shire, clinging to Lothlorien, clinging to fleeting glory gives only spiritual rope burn. So in Tom's house, when he asked Frodo for the ring, Tom's power and authority, his sageness, encourage Frodo while Frodo wears the ring to obey without question. Remember when Tom can actually see Frodo when Frodo wears the ring? Because Frodo was visible to Tom, could that mean that Bombadil, who is nature personified, sees only Frodo's original nature? Not a Frodo being tempted and targeted by the ring? Tom is an unsettling person for those who would be colonized by the ring. Imagine seeing the world's most powerful and deadly artifact having no power over someone like Tom, a lustless, contented person who cannot be bought for any price. He lives in a different economy, tells a different story, dwells in a different world, sings a different song, and that's why the ring has no power over him. Tom's nature is nature itself. His nature and fluency were forged way before the ring, and he perhaps embodies the ancient melodies of Iluvatar. Tom's clarity of who he was and where he came from meant no other power than his own controlled him. Tom lives today in our imaginations for his unique immunity to the ring of power. And reading his story, one may derive narrative energy to imagine differently in one's own wrestling with our personal versions of the ring and what it means to be human. So Tolkien gives us a guide on how we may walk in a failure-laden world, one marked by the long defeats. In Tom, he gives an example for endurance in the face of challenges. Tom's practices of not being a target and having no preferences make him not just a Taoist exemplar, but also this reader's model for living wisely in our strange worlds in which we make our preferences and then our preferences make us. Thank you so much for your attention.